Sign it or the wedding's off, his family told me with cold faces. I was sitting across from Jonathan's parents in their polished dining room, the kind of place where every glass sparkled and every painting on the wall screamed old money. I thought I was marrying into a family that might be distant or formal, but I never expected them to treat me like an intruder. They slid a thick packet of papers across the table and waited for me to pick it up. It was a prenup. Not just any prenup, but one designed to strip me of every possible right. If I signed it, I would walk into marriage with no security, no protection, and no dignity. Everything would belong to Jonathan and his family. I'd have nothing, not even a safety net if things fell apart. Jonathan sat quietly beside me, his jaw tight, his eyes glued to the table. I kept waiting for him to speak up, to defend me, to say his love for me was bigger than this stack of legal demands. But he didn't. His silence said more than words ever could. His mother leaned in, her voice calm but cutting. This isn't personal. It's just business. We have to protect the family legacy. His father's tone was sharper, colder. No signature, no wedding. Their words pierced me deeper than I expected. I wasn't some desperate girl chasing their fortune. They saw me as small, unworthy, a threat to the life they had built around their wealth. In their eyes, I was someone to control, not someone their son could love freely. For a moment, I almost crumbled under their arrogance. The shame burned through me. They thought I had nothing, that I would cling to Jonathan no matter how little they offered. They thought I was weak enough to give up everything for the privilege of standing at his side. What they didn't know was that I wasn't the helpless girl they imagined. I had spent years fighting to build the life I had. I lost my parents young and worked harder than anyone should have to just to stay afloat. I put myself through college, took jobs others turned down, and poured every ounce of energy into a small idea that grew into a thriving business. That business was worth $9 million. Quietly, carefully, I had built a fortune of my own. I never flaunted it, never spoke about it in casual conversations. It wasn't something I needed to wave in front of people to prove my value. But in that moment, as Jonathan's parents sat across from me acting as though I had nothing, I held on to that secret truth like armor. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need Jonathan's inheritance. I had my own strength, my own success, my own future. I looked down at the papers, then back at their cold eyes. I didn't sign. Instead, I tucked the moment deep inside me, already knowing this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Margaret Pierce's voice carried the sharpness of a knife, each word aimed straight at me. She sat across the table, back perfectly straight, hands folded, eyes filled with judgment. "This is not personal," she said smoothly, though her tone dripped with contempt. "It's just business. A woman of your background should understand that." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. A woman of your background. I heard the insult hidden inside. She meant my parents weren't alive to give me connections. She meant I hadn't been born into a house filled with chandeliers and country club memberships. She meant I would never belong. Jonathan sat beside me, his lips pressed in a thin line. He didn't lift his eyes, didn't take my hand, didn't push back against his mother's cruelty. I kept waiting for him to say something, anything at all, but the silence between us grew heavier. Harold Pierce cleared his throat, his tone blunt and absolute. "No signature, no wedding," he said. He didn't bother with the false sweetness his wife used. He looked at me like I was a problem to solve, not a woman his son loved. To him, I wasn't a person with dreams and sacrifices. I was just a risk on a ledger, someone who could threaten their money. I felt heat rise in my face. Shame and anger swirled together until I could barely breathe. These were supposed to be the people I would call family, yet here they were, stripping me of respect before I even said my vows. I looked at Jonathan again, silently begging him to speak. His eyes stayed low, shoulders hunched, like a child afraid to cross his parents. His silence cut deeper than Margaret's words or Harold's threats. It told me he had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. Every second in that room felt like a test. Margaret's eyes stayed locked on me, waiting for me to fold. Harold leaned back with the smugness of someone certain I had no other choice. Jonathan sat there, trapped in his cowardice. And me, I sat with my hands in my lap, holding back the truth of who I really was. They thought I was powerless, and in that moment I let them believe it. Inside, though, something shifted. The humiliation sank in like ice, but beneath it was a spark of something stronger. It wasn't just sadness, it was betrayal. The man who once promised me love was now hiding behind his parents' demands. The family I was about to marry into didn't see me as a partner, but as a threat to protect themselves from. I stayed quiet, holding back the words I wanted to spill, holding back the truth of the life I had built on my own. They didn't deserve to know, not yet. What they deserved was the same coldness they gave me. So I sat, humiliated on the outside, but inside, I was already preparing for the day they would learn just how wrong they were about me. The days after that meeting felt heavy, like I was walking with weights tied to my ankles. I tried to shake off the way they had spoken to me, but the more I looked at Jonathan and his family, the more things I had once brushed aside began to shine like warning lights. Jonathan had always been curious about small details of my life. At first, I thought it was natural, a fiancé wanting to know me better. But looking back, I realized his questions circled back to money more than anything else. He would ask how much my business made in a month, or how much I had saved. Sometimes it was casual, like a joke, but now I wondered if he was trying to measure me, not love me. Margaret was no better. She picked at every choice I made for the wedding, from the dress I loved to the people I wanted by my side. "That gown looks too plain for our family," she said once, her lips curling as if the sight of it offended her. Another time, she glanced at my guest list and asked why I wanted to invite so many ordinary people. She said it with a laugh, but it was clear she didn't think my friends or family were worthy of being seen at their perfect, polished event. Each comment left me smaller, like I was being erased piece by piece. Then there was Harold. He didn't bother hiding his thoughts. One evening over dinner, he leaned back in his chair and began talking about the Pierce family's legacy. He said it in a way that made me feel like I was an outsider staring through the glass. "It's our duty to protect what's been built for generations," he said, not looking at me, but making sure I heard. It was clear I was not part of this hour. I was a threat, someone who could spoil their perfect picture. The more I thought about it, the more I felt my chest tighten. Was I marrying Jonathan, or was I being absorbed into a family that would never accept me? I had told myself love could make it work, but love didn't sound so sure anymore. I called my best friend Rachel, because she was the one person who always told me the truth, even when it hurt. I told her everything, the questions, the insults, the legacy talk. She listened without interrupting, just letting me spill out every frustration I had bottled up. When I finally stopped, her voice was steady and firm. "Don't you dare sign anything," she said. "If he really loves you, he won't need a piece of paper to protect himself from you." Her words hit me hard because deep down, I already knew she was right. I wanted to believe Jonathan's love was stronger than his parents' influence, but doubts were creeping in faster than I could push them away. Every sign pointed to the same painful truth. His love came with conditions, and those conditions were written not only in that prenup, but in the way he allowed his parents to treat me. For the first time, I wondered if I had mistaken affection for love, and if the man I was about to marry had never truly been mine at all. The pressure finally came to a breaking point. One evening, Jonathan asked me to come over to his parents' house. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy, and the three of them were already sitting together in the living room, waiting for me like a jury ready to deliver a verdict. Margaret spoke first, her tone sharp but calm, as if she were talking about a simple business deal. "If you don't sign by tomorrow, there will be no wedding." Her words dropped into the room like stones into water, leaving ripples of silence behind. I turned to Jonathan, searching his face for reassurance, for a flicker of love or even hesitation. Instead, he avoided my eyes, his hands clasped tightly together. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the warmth I once fell in love with. "It's just a piece of paper, Clara. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just a piece of paper." That's what he called it. He didn't see the way it stripped me of respect, the way it reduced me to nothing more than a signature at the bottom of their demands. He didn't even try to soften the blow or defend me. He simply repeated what his parents wanted, like he couldn't think for himself anymore. I felt something inside me crack. For so long, I had believed Jonathan would protect me, that our love was enough to handle whatever challenges came our way. But in that moment, I saw the truth. He wasn't strong enough to stand beside me. He wasn't willing to risk his parents' disapproval, even if it meant hurting the woman he was supposed to marry. The realization settled in slowly, heavy and cold. I wasn't marrying a partner. I was marrying a man who would always bend to someone else's will. Every time his parents raised their voices, he would shrink back. Every time they pushed me down, he would let it happen. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I might break down right there in front of them. The humiliation burned through me. the pain of seeing the man I loved choose silence over love. But beneath that pain, something else stirred, a small, hard spark of defiance. I sat up straighter, forcing myself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. Inside, I was crushed, yes. My heart ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. But at the same time, something inside me hardened. I realized I couldn't depend on Jonathan to protect me. I would have to protect myself. They thought they had cornered me, left me with only one option: sign or lose everything. What they didn't know was that I had already begun to see through the illusion. Love built on conditions wasn't love at all. I left that room with my head held as high as I could manage, even though my heart was breaking. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let them decide my worth. The night after their ultimatum, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind refusing to rest. Their words replayed again and again, cutting into me like sharp glass. For hours I asked myself how I had reached this point, how I had fallen in love with someone who could sit in silence while his parents tore me down. But as the night dragged on, another thought rose to the surface. I had been here before, not in the same way, but in the same place of being underestimated, pushed aside, and treated as less. And every time, I had climbed back stronger. I remembered being a teenager, standing in a cold hospital hallway as doctors told me my parents were gone. In an instant, my world had broken apart, and I had no one to lean on. I worked through grief while also learning how to survive. Rent, food, bills. All of it fell on me before I was even ready. There was no family fortune to rescue me, no safety net waiting. Just me, and the stubborn will not to give up. I pushed through college by working nights, juggling shifts in diners and offices just to keep up with tuition. There were weeks I barely slept, weeks when I wondered if all the struggle was worth it. But I kept going because I knew I wanted a life I built with my own hands, not one handed to me. When I started my business, people laughed. They said it was too risky, that I didn't have the money, the experience, or the background. I worked anyway, building it one client, one deal, one sleepless night at a time. Slowly, painfully, it grew. And eventually, I created something that not only supported me, but proved every doubter wrong. Remembering that, the shame I had felt in Jonathan's parents' house began to fade. I promised myself years ago, after so many struggles, that no one would ever belittle me again. Not for my past, not for what I didn't have, and certainly not for what they assumed about me. I wasn't the weak girl they wanted me to be. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything, from the prenup to the insults, and asked him to review the contract they wanted me to sign. He read it carefully, explaining each clause, and confirmed what I already knew. It was designed to strip me of every possible right. Hearing it in his calm, professional voice only fueled the fire inside me. I could have walked away quietly, left Jonathan and his family to their arrogance. But something inside me refused to end it that way. They wanted to control me, humiliate me, make me feel small. I wasn't going to give them that victory. If they were so proud of their power and their legacy, then I would make sure everyone saw the truth. I hung up the phone with my lawyer, my decision made. I wouldn't just escape them. I would show the world exactly who they were. The morning of the wedding came bright and clear, but the air around me felt thick with tension. The hotel ballroom had been decorated to perfection. White flowers everywhere, polished silver, soft music drifting in the background. Guests filled the rows of chairs, dressed in their finest clothes, smiles plastered on their faces as if everything were perfect. They had no idea what was about to unfold. Jonathan's family moved around the room with smug certainty. Margaret fussed with the flowers, Harold spoke to business associates near the front, and Jonathan himself stood stiffly at the altar. They believed they had won, that I had quietly given in and signed their papers. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they barely glanced at me when I entered. They thought I was already theirs to control. But as I walked down the aisle, I held my head high. My dress swept softly against the floor, and with each step, I felt a growing calm. The fear I had once carried was gone. In its place was a quiet strength that only I knew the reason for. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I walked like someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. The music faded as I reached the altar. Jonathan gave me a stiff smile, but I could see the nervous twitch in his jaw. Maybe some part of him sensed that something wasn't right. The officiant opened his book, ready to begin the vows. The room hushed, everyone leaning forward with expectant smiles. My heart beat steadily in my chest, but my voice was clear and strong when I spoke. Before I marry into this family, I said. "I think the truth should be clear to everyone here." A wave of shock moved through the crowd. I could hear gasps, whispers rising like a tide. The officiant froze mid-sentence, staring at me in confusion. Jonathan stiffened, his eyes wide, his hand tightening around mine as if he could stop me. But nothing could. I looked out at the sea of faces, friends, relatives, business partners, people who had come to celebrate. They were all waiting, watching, unsure of what I meant. Behind them, I caught the expressions of Margaret and Harold, their confident smiles faltering for the first time. They hadn't expected this. They thought the matter was finished, locked away in silence. The weight of their arrogance pressed against me, but it no longer hurt. For once, I was the one in control of the room. I had held my secret close, I had endured their insults and their demands. But this was the moment I chose to reveal the truth. The guests leaned closer, their whispers fading into silence as they waited for me to continue. All eyes were on me, the bride who had just stopped her own wedding. And as I stood there, the strength inside me settled into something unshakable. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer their story. It was mine. The silence in the room stretched long after my words. Everyone waited, eyes wide, breaths held. I could feel Jonathan's grip on my hand tighten, his knuckles white, but I gently pulled away. My voice carried clearly across the hall as I spoke again, steady and calm. "I want you all to know the truth," I said. "For months, this family has treated me like I was nothing. They pushed a contract in front of me, one designed to take away every right I have. They wanted to make sure that if anything happened, I would walk away with nothing. They saw me as a risk, as someone beneath them." The whispers began again, louder this time. I saw heads turn, guests exchanging stunned looks. Some leaned closer to each other, already murmuring about what I had just revealed. I kept my eyes forward, never faltering. "What they don't know," I continued, "is that I never needed their money. I built something of my own. I worked for years, and I created a business that today is worth $9 million. The words seemed to hang in the air like thunder. The room erupted in shocked gasps, and more than one guest let out a loud exclamation. I could see the disbelief ripple across their faces, people who had assumed I was marrying Jonathan for security or wealth. Their assumptions shattered in an instant. Jonathan's face drained of color. He looked as if the ground beneath him had opened up, his mouth slightly open but no words coming out. The confident groom standing tall at the altar was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly looked very small. Margaret's fury was immediate. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line, her eyes sharp and burning. She clutched the arm of her chair, nails digging into the fabric as if that could contain her rage. She had thought she held all the power. Now, it was slipping out of her hands in front of everyone. Harold, on the other hand, sat frozen. His face was blank, but the shock was clear. The man who always had something to say, who always spoke about legacy and protection, was completely silent. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. I let the reactions wash over me before I spoke again. I never cared about the Pierce fortune. I never cared about what this family owned. I already had more than enough. What mattered to me was love, respect, and partnership. But instead of giving me that, they tried to reduce me to nothing with a stack of papers. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't fight back. The room fell quiet again. Every guest was staring now, some with sympathy, others with open shock, and a few with anger directed at the Pierces. Standing there in front of everyone, I felt no fear, no shame. The secret I had held close was no longer mine alone. And with that truth out in the open, their power over me was gone forever. All eyes were on me, and the room was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. I looked at Jonathan, then at the guests who had gathered to celebrate what they thought would be a joyful union. My voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "I will not be marrying Jonathan today." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Some people leaned forward, as if they hadn't heard me right. Others pressed their hands to their mouths. The music that had played only moments before now felt like a memory, replaced by heavy silence. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the crisp set of papers they had forced on me. The prenup I had never signed. Slowly, deliberately, I walked toward Margaret. Her eyes were sharp with fury, her jaw tight. Without a word, I held the papers out to her. She snatched them from my hand, her fingers trembling. The sound of the pages crumpling slightly under her grip filled the space between us. Jonathan stepped forward quickly, panic breaking across his face. "Clara, please," he said, his voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't do this. Don't ruin everything. We can work this out. It's just a misunderstanding." His hands reached for mine, but I stepped back, putting space between us. The pity I once had for him vanished. My voice was firm when I answered, leaving no room for doubt. "You ruined it the second you chose them over me." That single sentence seemed to echo off the walls. Jonathan froze, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Margaret's face turned red, and Harold stared at me with a look that was half outrage, half disbelief, as though he still couldn't believe I had the courage to defy them publicly. The guests couldn't stay quiet any longer. Whispers filled the room like a rising tide. "Did you hear that? She's worth millions. They tried to trap her?" The comments grew louder, sharper. I saw heads shaking in disappointment, eyes glaring in the Pierce's direction. A few people rose from their seats, clearly unwilling to stay and witness the rest. One couple near the front stood and walked out, muttering their disgust. Jonathan reached for me again, desperation on his face. "We can fix this, Clara. Please don't leave like this. Don't embarrass me." His words only showed me what truly mattered to him. His pride, his image, his family's reputation. Not me. I turned from him without another glance. The weight of the day lifted from my shoulders as I walked back down the aisle, past the flowers, past the shocked faces, past the whispers. Every step I took away from that altar was a step back to myself, away from betrayal and toward freedom. Behind me, the noise grew louder, the Pierces drowning in the judgment of their own guests. I didn't need to see it to know the truth. Their perfect image was crumbling, and I was no longer a part of it. I walked out of the hall with my back straight and my head held high. The sound of voices followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt free. The weight that had been pressing down on me was gone. I wasn't a bride anymore, but I was myself again, and that was more than enough. The next few days were strangely quiet. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from people who had been at the wedding and from those who had heard about it afterward. Some sent support, others just wanted details, but the story was already spreading faster than I could keep up. People couldn't stop talking about the bride who walked away and the family who tried to trap her. Then the real fallout began. Jonathan's family had built their image on respect and power, but all anyone could see now was greed. Their business partners heard what happened, and many of them wanted nothing to do with the Pierces anymore. Contracts were canceled, meetings postponed, deals they thought were certain suddenly vanished. In the business world, reputation is everything, and theirs had crumbled overnight. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Margaret was furious, Harold was scrambling to repair connections, and Jonathan was a shadow of himself, humiliated by the entire ordeal. For so long, they had thought they were untouchable. Now they were the subject of gossip, laughter, and open criticism. The same guests who once bowed to their influence were shaking their heads in disgust. While their empire cracked, my own world only grew brighter. My company gained more attention, not because I flaunted what had happened, but because people respected the way I carried myself. Clients reached out, praising my strength, and new opportunities began to appear. It was as if breaking free from Jonathan's family had unlocked doors I hadn't even noticed before. Each morning I woke up lighter, no longer weighed down by the fear of what his family might do or say. I threw myself into my work, and it thrived. The projects I once worried about seemed easier to handle now, and every success reminded me why I had chosen myself over them. I had proven that I didn't need the Pierces to survive. In fact, I was better off without them. Jonathan tried to reach out. First it was texts, then calls, then emails. He begged for a chance to explain, to make things right. He claimed he still loved me, that he regretted staying silent. But each message only made me feel stronger in my decision. If he hadn't found the courage to stand up for me when it mattered most, his words now meant nothing. I blocked him without hesitation. No explanations, no second chances. My life was moving forward, and he was part of a past I had no desire to return to. Walking away had been the hardest choice I ever made, but watching them fall while I rose only proved one thing. I hadn't lost anything at all. I had won. In the weeks that followed, I had time to breathe, to sit quietly and think about everything that had happened. At first, I expected sadness to hit me like a wave. I thought I would cry over the wedding that never happened, over the man I once believed I would spend my life with. But the tears never came. Instead, there was only calm. When I looked back on Jonathan and his family, I didn't see love or a future anymore. I saw control, silence, and betrayal. I saw a man who chose his parents' comfort over my dignity. The memory no longer hurt me. It simply reminded me of why walking away had been the right choice. There was no regret in me, only relief. Life began to feel lighter, freer. I could make decisions without anyone questioning my worth or trying to control me. The home I returned to each night felt warmer than the cold mansion they had tried to pull me into. I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had escaped a cage. Rachel stood by me through it all. She came over with wine and laughter, never letting me sit in silence for too long. We toasted to new beginnings, to strength, to freedom. "You didn't just dodge a bullet," she said one evening, clinking her glass against mine. "You dodged the whole firing squad." We laughed until our sides hurt, and in that moment, I felt nothing but gratitude. Work flourished, and so did I. Every project I took on reminded me of the independence I had fought so hard for. My company was no longer just a business. It was proof of my resilience, a shield against anyone who had ever doubted me. With every success, I grew taller, stronger, more certain of the path I had chosen. Friends and clients often asked if I ever wondered what would have happened if I had stayed. My answer was always the same. No, because staying would have meant shrinking, bending, and losing myself piece by piece. Walking away gave me everything I truly needed: peace, respect, and the knowledge that I had honored my own worth. One evening, sitting on my balcony as the sun dipped low, I thought about the girl who had once felt small in that Pierce living room. She had been scared, humiliated, desperate for approval. But she had found her voice, and when she used it, she had freed herself. That girl was still me, but now she was stronger, wiser, unshakable. If I had gone through with that wedding, I would have been trapped in a life where I was never enough. Instead, I chose to be enough for myself. That decision changed everything. And if I could leave anyone with one piece of advice, it would be this: if you ever feel pressured to give up your worth for someone else's approval, don't. I walked away, and it was the best decision I ever made. Do you think Clara made the right choice by walking away from Jonathan and his family, or should she have stayed and tried to fix things? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more stories.